A woman is dead after a toddler got hold of a gun?
A toddler shoots dad and pregnant mother with one bullet.
Shot in the head by her 3-year-old son. This morning, a toddler shot his sister dead.
America's got a real problem. It's time we did something. We need to lock them up. Not the guns, that's just un-American. The toddlers. Round them up, deport them, get them out of our country. And keep them away from our guns. Guns don't kill people, toddlers kill people. Keep America safe. Stop the toddlers now at toddlerskill.org.
Thanks so much for being here. Jess, congratulations. You are being honored along with Katie Couric. That is correct, right?
Thank you very much.
How did
I am. It's so weird to be honored by something like you guys because you do all the work, right? But I got people to buy a table, so that's something.
Which is good. It's also not accurate to say that we do all the work. We're honoring you for a good reason.
Well,
You've really helped to bring this issue to light over the past year especially, so you're one of those truly deserving honorees.
Well,
Jess,
thank you, Dan.
what made you start bringing the issue to light more? As the editorial director of People magazine, it definitely, you had a cover photo with all of the victims in Orlando. You printed their names. You've written editorials. When did that start for you?
It happened after the mass shooting in Roseburg, Oregon, at the community college, I believe it was, and it just felt like it was happening every single week at that point. And Obama called a press conference, and the minute I saw him on television, I thought, oh, here we are again. The president's going to come out. He's going to say this and that, and then nothing is going to be done. And when he got up to speak, he said exactly what was on all of our minds, is that here we are again, we're going to do nothing, and it's my fault, it's Congress's fault, it's everybody's fault, including the media. And I really heard that. And so I thought, how are we going to cover this one differently than we cover all of the other mass shootings, which is an incredibly strange thing to say to yourself, right? How do we cover it differently than all the other mass shootings? And so I thought, instead of focusing on the victims and all of that, which we did, we also published the phone numbers of all 535 members of Congress. Yeah, and great. So it was simply a way to put their feet to the fire and also to get reasonable voices into the debate, because I think that all Congress ever hears from are the lunatics. I know that's not true. They hear from a lot of people.
The loudest people.
But yeah, they listen to them too much, quite obviously. And so we didn't, tell people what to say or how they should vote or how they should feel about gun control or no gun control. It was just make your voice heard, because we do know that every single person nearly wants some kind of reasonable restrictions on gun ownership.
Yet we're still in this position where there's no action.
No action at all.
Yeah. Dan, how did you come across Jess's work, and what made you want to honor him?
Well, we saw it when he put it in People magazine, and I hope all of you and all you out there appreciate, because it's easy to see now with people speaking out on this issue, finally, with people saying as they have that they've had enough of the daily terror that happens in this country with gun violence. 90 people are killed with guns every single day in our country. It's easy to say, oh, of course the editor of a major magazine put it on the front page and told people to call Congress. That was a truly bold move, and as it turned out, an historic one. And it was the first really example in popular culture of what we've been calling a tipping point that's been happening on this issue over the past year. A tipping point where, the American public has finally spoken up and said, enough of the mass shootings in malls and movie theaters and churches and schools and nightclubs, enough of that daily terror that's claiming the lives of 90 people in our country every day, enough of easy access to guns by the people that we all agree shouldn't have them, and enough, as Jess helped to demonstrate of a craven small group of politicians putting the interests of the corporate gun lobby ahead of the safety of the people that they've been elected to represent. Enough. And that voice has emerged over the past year after the tragedy in Orlando, for example. We put 150,000 calls into Congress to demand what our core policy goal is of expanding life-saving Brady background checks to all gun sales. 150,000 calls. So what's changed, thanks in no small part to Jess and other folks who've spoken up like he has, is that it's not just the small group of people who are against what the rest of the American public supports that is being heard from now. And Congress is listening, and things are changing. You know, as we saw over the last 24 hours, they're not changing overnight, but make no mistake, they're changing. And Jess actually deserves a lot of credit for that, and that's why it's our honor to honor him.
Let's go back to the beginning so people know exactly what the Brady Campaign is. Where did it come from? How did you get involved?
So the Brady Campaign and Brady Center is the oldest and most successful gun violence prevention organization that's out there. It's associated with the name of Jim and Sarah Brady. Jim Brady was the press secretary to Ronald Reagan, who was critically injured in the assassination attempt on his life. He was shot in the head. He lived for several years until recently, actually. He just died last year, along with his amazing wife, Sarah. Together, they took this organization and turned it into real change, most notably passing the Brady Bill, which became the Brady Law, that requires background checks on all gun sales in our country. The problem is that when that law passed, there were a couple of, at the time, well, there was one small loophole that it didn't cover gun shows. So the same person that would get denied from buying a gun as a prohibited purchaser at a federally licensed firearm dealer because of the Brady Bill could walk down the street to a gun show and buy that gun, no questions asked. Since then, the internet has also come into existence. And today, as a result, there are thousands of guns sold every day without Brady background checks at gun shows and on the internet. And that's why it's our priority to expand those Brady background checks that work. 2.8 million gun sales have been blocked at federally licensed firearm dealers. To expand those life-saving background checks to all gun sales. So that's the policy focus of the Brady Campaign. I personally got involved, unfortunately, as too many people do, through a personal experience. My younger brother, Matt, like Jim Brady, was shot in the head in a shooting that happened, in this case, on the observation deck of the Empire State Building. And at the time, I was a partner at a big ad agency, J. Walter Thompson, and I wound up quitting that job to start an organization that's now led me to this role as president of the Brady Campaign.
Wow, that's incredible. Kim, you are yourself a victim of gun violence. When did you start working with the Brady Campaign, the Brady Center?
Well, my path to activism started much later than my incident with gun violence. I was shot in Atlanta, Georgia in 1999. I was on a date with my friend Philip. He was a high school teacher. And it was 4 days after Columbine. So as a high school teacher, he was very concerned about that. And we were later robbed at gunpoint, and I was shot, and Philip was killed. And, you know, I didn't do anything for a long time. I thought what had happened to me was an anomaly, and I just kept going about my life. And eventually I moved to New York, and I had 2 kids, and then Sandy Hook happened. And it was sort of like my personal 9/11. I remember exactly what I was wearing, where I was standing, what I was doing. And my daughter was sitting in a first-grade classroom. And at that point, I knew that what had happened to me could happen to my children, and that just changed everything for me. So I got involved. And, you know, it started through social media, and I haven't stopped since. Knowing what I know now, I feel like I can't stop, because then I would be complicit.
Jess, as the editorial director of People, you know, People is an entertainment magazine. It's a fun magazine for people. It covers celebrity, and there are human interest stories. And I know in one of the most recent issues, there was a kind of a deep dive into the Long Island serial killer, so you cover stories like that as well. Was it difficult for you to make this decision to make the magazine take such an editorial stance against gun violence within the magazine?
It happened very organically. I mean, I think I came in, we closed on Monday nights, and we were sitting there on Monday morning talking about how we were going to cover this, and that's when I just brought up, why don't we publish all the numbers after we pay tribute to the victims and talk about the tragedy. It just seemed like the right thing to do, and I had sort of accepted this challenge by the president to react differently this time. Let's don't do the same thing we always do that had led to such inaction. And so I don't think that I really realized the impact that it would have or the blowback that we would get, because
What kind of blowback did you get?
Well, look, I'm sure that when Kim speaks out about her experience as a victim of gun violence, when parents of children who died at Sandy Hook speak out, they are subjected to the worst animosity from, people who were convinced we're trying to take their guns away, which is absolutely untrue. You just want to keep them out of the hands of maniacs. And so I was surprised by that, but it only made me dig in my heels a little bit deeper. And I remember watching Katie Couric's documentary, Under the Gun, and realizing I am speaking for the vast majority. I mean, we are a magazine for women and a brand for women. And so I'm speaking up for them. And, People's mission is to entertain and empower and inspire, and this certainly falls under the empowerment category. It's also given us a great way to cover these mass shootings since then. So when the Orlando tragedy happened, we were able to resurface those phone numbers and tell, once again, call your Congress people. And in that case, I had also been really educated a lot through the course of our call to action earlier about being really careful to not glorify the perpetrators of this violence. And so that led to running the photos of all the victims of Orlando on the cover.
You mentioned Congress. Gun violence, the percentage of people who support more background checks and support common sense gun ownership and laws, the percentages are through the roof for people who support that. Yet there is very little action in Congress, as you said. How do you remain hopeful? How do you remain hopeful, especially after yesterday?
Well, the fact that there's so much support out there is where we derive our hope, and also just seeing the extent to which we really are at a tipping point at this issue, the extent to which the American public clearly has had enough, and the extent to which the American public finally is making its voice heard. I talked about those 150,000 calls. When I first took this job about 4 years ago, the common narrative in Congress, you'd go in there and meet with these guys, and they'd kind of put their arm around you, sometimes literally, and say, listen, I get it. I get that you're not trying to take people's guns away. I get that this isn't about the Second Amendment. I get that the public is overwhelmingly supportive, but I'm hearing 10-1 from the other side to a congressperson. That's what they would all say. I'm hearing from my constituents 10-1 from the other side. Of course, it was about 300 people to 30 people, that 10-1. Now, because of social media, they say that the internet is the great democratizer of information. Social media has really been a democratizer of activism. It's enabled us to reach people. Sometimes I equate it to, we can act like white blood cells, right? Kind of converge and immediately attack with a lot less money than it would have taken in years past. And thanks to our ability to act like those white blood cells, now, like I said, we're putting 150,000 calls into Congress in 24 hours. We've taken that narrative of 10-1 and absolutely turned it on its head, and then some. And that provides a lot of inspiration. And then we're seeing all sorts of progress, like bills being introduced that nobody thought was going to see the light of day before the elections. They didn't pass, and there's still all sorts of shifty maneuvering and sausage making that's happening in D.C. But if you take a step back, it becomes clearer and clearer, for every great movement, civil rights, marriage, which is civil rights, there's a moment when you can kind of look back, usually in hindsight, and say, that's when things really started to change. And every day, it seems, we're seeing new proof points that for the issue of gun violence prevention, that moment is now. And What Jess has done and has been doing and has continued to do is a proof point. Actually, in a lot of ways, you talked about the elections last night. Yeah, bitter disappointment at the presidential level for sure, with a candidate who really was going to do the right thing for this issue, really represent the American people where we stand. 90%
when we say the
plus.
when we say the right thing, we're talking about the very least you could do.
Well, there's
in regards to gun violence. Like I'm sorry, but like I my one moment of soapboxing. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like at the moment, overwhelming support publicly for the most common sense gun ownership in this country, yet Congress sort of refuses to act on these bills.
Here's the important thing, and this might even elevate your soapbox a little bit more. The right thing to do and the common ground is also basically the most that we can do, which is expand Brady background checks to keep guns out of the hands of the people that we all agree shouldn't have them. 90% plus of the American public supports that goal. And remember, Brady background checks have blocked 2.8 million sales to those dangerous and prohibited purchasers, yet there are thousands of people who buy guns every day in our country without them. It's like there are two lines to get on an airplane. One with security that is effective, and one with no security whatsoever. And you can, if you're intent on doing harm on that airplane, you can choose which line you want to get on to buy a gun. So that will have a huge impact when we can do it. So don't confuse common ground with the least we can do. 90% of Americans, 90% of Republicans, more than 80% of gun owners, more than 70% of NRA members support expanding Brady background checks. And
the NRA itself does not, right?
Well, the NRA doesn't, and more importantly, this isn't about the NRA. That's not the end game. The end game is the politicians who do their bidding. And right now they do their bidding because they consider it politically expedient. And the good thing about the 150,000 calls into Congress, the good thing about the way we're able to put pressure on them, we have evidence of, we flipped Congress people because of the pressure we've been able to put on them, because of how we've been able to shame them. The good thing is that's what defines this tipping point. We're shifting the notion of political expediency. Change is messy. It doesn't happen overnight. All those other issues that I talked about never does. But again, you take that step back, and you asked me, started with where I get my inspiration. That's where I get my inspiration, that we are clearly at a tipping point on this issue because the American public finally is making its voice heard.
Jess, what's it like to be able to use People magazine for this purpose, for something that could garner so much change, so much necessary change?
Well, I think if you have an opportunity to do it and you feel like, and it also costs you nothing. It's like, I'm sure a few people got mad, but I think most people liked it. It only helped the brand from that perspective. So it costs us nothing. Why wouldn't you do it? I mean, you reached 44 million people in print and another 44 million people on your website, and that doesn't even begin to count like Twitter reach. Like you've got to use your power for good, right? And I didn't worry about it costing us a lot. It was common sense. As I said, I didn't give a whole lot of thought to the first time that we did it because it just seemed like the right thing to do. We can't keep covering this thing. It is an epidemic. If there was a health epidemic, we would be doing stories about how to help people protect themselves and their kids from it. And this is an epidemic.
I have to ask, as a member of the media, how do you think the media normally fails the American people when they talk about these kinds of shootings?
Miserably.
How?
I saw it when people ran when we ran Congress's numbers and it got talked about. Oh my gosh, People magazine is doing this. The next day, the coverage on the news shows and on the morning shows, and these aren't right-wing morning. This was the Today Show actually. The headline was, "Is People magazine taking a side?" And we weren't. We were just saying, we've got a problem. Let your voice be heard, and here's how to do it.
I think this brings up a larger point of a place that we're at right now, not to get too deep into it, which is this idea that the media has to cover both opinions as if they're fact, which is not true. There is fact, and then there is opinion. And at the moment, you have the Today Show or CNN or everywhere else having two sides debate something as if one side isn't just completely on the right side of things.
It's pandering disguised as balanced.
And it's when from an outsider's perspective, when in the name of fairness, actually, ironically, sometimes, it's actually the ultimate unfair. I mean, you're dealing with 90% plus of the American public. Here's a fun fact: 6% of the American public is against Brady background checks, expanding them to all gun sales. That's the same percentage of the American public that believes that the moon landing was a fake, or believes that the government is putting mind-controlling technology in TV broadcast signals. I mean, that's how, and literally, that's literal polling. That's how uncontroversial. So, what is fairness? Fairness is certainly not on an issue like that. Even if being true to where the American public is on this issue, giving 50-50 equal coverage, forgetting about the fact that we're telling the truth, and the folks who are on the other side just absolutely aren't.
Kim, what's it like for you as someone who has suffered gun violence as well as suffered post-traumatic stress disorder following one of the most horrific gun violence incidents in this country, Sandy Hook, to watch it be so difficult to make small progress in regards to gun violence prevention?
Well, I'm gobsmacked on an often basis, but seeing People Magazine do what they did twice. I can tell you that you had advocates all over the country running to the newsstand to buy that issue, because we understand by watching other movements and how they succeed, this starts at a cultural level. We've got to move the people to move the legislators. And so that's how we do it. And it is a pity that the reaction you had, pitted us against one another, because it's not a political issue. It's a public health crisis, and we need to treat it as such. And I think that people underestimate the power of the corporate gun lobby, but I think they underestimate the power of people like us.
Absolutely. I'm going to open it up to the audience for some questions. Does anyone have any questions out here?
Hello, this is for Jess. So when you were in the room figuring out the cover of People Magazine, did you realize how radical this would be to show queer and gender nonconforming people of color on the front of a magazine who are virtually unknown? I mean, with Sandy Hook, the faces of children, that's, readers are going to be, they're going to react to it in a certain way. And I'm thinking about where I'm from in Indiana, a really conservative, horrible little town. And people
really
that
horrible.
So people who are friends with my parents, for them, that's probably the first time ever they've seen a queer person of color. And by putting their faces on the magazine, it's a radical thing to do. And I just wondered if there's money people involved. I mean, it's a business. What you do is a business, and I know that you did something brave, but I can't imagine that there wasn't some pushback being like, this is gonna be bad for our readers, or people are gonna be angry. And I wondered if there was a discussion.
I for my bosses at Time Inc., I will alert them. I will always alert them if I think that we're doing something that is going to get us in trouble. I mean, a few years ago, we did a cover story on Brittany Menard, who was who became sort of the poster child, it's a terrible word, for assisted suicide. Because she was terminally ill, she was going to take her own life, was moving to Oregon to do it. And that is something that I would see as very controversial, that I would alert my bosses to. In the case of Orlando, you know what? I didn't really think of them as gay or transgender. I just thought of them as people, and I would have put, if we could get the photos, which was mostly what I was thinking about in the 24 hours we had to do it. How are we going to get all of these photos, and how are we going to get all the information about these victims? That's what was really on my mind. I wasn't thinking of them really as gay or brown or black or transgender, and that may be just because I'm gay, and so I wasn't maybe being very sensitive to the fact that people would be upset. I got absolutely no blowback from anyone, like readers, bosses, for putting all of those victims on the cover. The only blowback that I got was from the gay community and a couple of gay columnists who were offended that I didn't identify these victims as LGBTQ. on the cover. We just said the victims of the Orlando shooting. It didn't really occur to me to call them gay or straight or whatever. They were just people killed by gun violence.
Dan, I want to ask you another question about your campaigns at the Brady Center, because I think we only discussed really one, which was the Brady background checks, and one of them is to stop bad apple gun dealers. 5% of gun dealers that supply 90% of guns involved in crime. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, first of all, did you guys hear that? 5% of gun dealers in our country sells 90% of the guns that are recovered on the streets, cities across the country in crimes. So forget the 80-20 rule that you've probably heard about. 5% of gun dealers sell 90% of crime guns.
That doesn't sound like that many to shut down.
Right, and it's not. It's a few thousand of these irresponsible at best, often negligent, often illegal a-holes that are responsible for the lion's share of the crime that's devastating cities across this country. And that's why we are laser focused on shutting those bad apple gun dealers down. First, we need to identify who they are. So we need to work with cities across the country, law enforcement across the country, to do what are called crime gun trace reports. The city of Chicago did one, for example, a kind of very groundbreaking one, that showed that this one bad apple gun dealer, just like Grandma used to say, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. One bad apple gun dealer called Chuck's Gun Shop and Pistol Range, right over the border of the south side of Chicago, in Riverdale, Illinois. You can walk there from the south side of Chicago. Sold 1,500 crime guns that were recovered on the streets of Chicago in 4 years. The average gun dealer in the area sold 3. Chuck's knows what they're doing. They're selling it through straw purchasers. Somebody walks in with somebody who can pass a background check, picks out a bunch of guns, and then they have the other person pass the background check.
That is such an important example to bring up, because so often when people talk about gun control measures, when advocates talk about gun control measures, opponents say, well, in Chicago, it's the strongest gun laws in the country, and they still got guns all across the streets, never also stating that most of those guns come from outside of Chicago.
We know exactly where those guns are coming from. So yeah, they're right. Chicago has strong gun laws, including Chuck's would never be able to operate in the city limits of Chicago, but Chuck's is right there on the outskirts, flooding crime guns onto the streets of Chicago. And so there are a few things that we're doing to go after them. One is we're suing the bastards. We have a legal team called our Legal Action Project that for years has been litigating against these bad apple gun dealers who are doing it for their business, to send them an undeniable message that doing this can be decidedly bad for your business. We've won a number of cases, including one, for example, on behalf of Chicago police officer Tommy Wortham III, two-time Iraq War veteran who returned to Chicago to be a law enforcement officer like his father. He was killed when he was off duty in front of his parents' house by gang members who bought their gun from a negligent bad apple gun dealer that we sued, won a big monetary settlement, and got that gun dealer to change their ways and also send a warning to all the other bad apples out there. So that's a very effective thing. The other thing that we're doing is we're protesting them, we're shaming them. We're leading marches from the south side of Chicago to Chuck's doorstep. For too long, we've put a face only on the victims of gun violence. Very important.
Is Chuck still open?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. So we put a face on the victims, but we haven't put a face on the perpetrators like Chuck's. We need to make a national, like hopefully we're doing now, a national media sensation out of Chuck's and their irresponsibility. And that's another thing that we have the opportunity to do. And then the government can do more. The ATF can do more. That licenses these bad apple gun dealers to crack down. And now the gun lobby's made that very hard. They've taken funding away from the ATF, and they've also passed some truly evil laws. But there are things that we can do and that activists and advocates can do out there to put pressure on them. And if they go to our website at bradycampaign.org, you can learn some of the things that you can do to make your voice heard against bad apple gun dealers.
Now is the time to join an activist campaign against gun violence. Sorry.
Yesterday was.
Yeah.
So there are two things. There's that, and there's the fact that now more than ever, your voice matters. We are finally closing that disgraceful disconnect that exists between how the American public feels / what's in our best interest and what's being done about it. So it's really why you started by asking what the Brady Campaign is. Most fundamentally, that's why we exist, to empower the American public, to take that voice of the American public and turn it into change, to expand Brady background checks to all gun sales, to stop bad apple gun dealers, and then the third thing is to beat back the myth that the gun lobby has created to sell more guns, that guns in the home are more protective than they are dangerous. We're not saying get rid of guns. We're not saying there's no reason to own a gun. We're just saying that when you bring a gun into your house, there are risks that you should be aware of that the gun lobby doesn't want you to be aware of because they just want to sell more guns without any concern whatsoever what winds up happening. And what winds up happening is a story like a man that I've become very close with named Fareed Nayyab, whose son Cayman was 13 years old. They were sitting at the dinner table after dinner, suburban Philadelphia, and Cayman got a bad report card home over the internet through email from school and stormed out into the cold Philadelphia night. They were looking for him for 3 days. For those 3 days, Fareed will tell you that he didn't think once about the gun that he had brought into his home 20 years ago. Why? To keep his family safer, for protection. And Cayman used that gun, 13 years old, happy, healthy kid, to take his own life in a temporary moment of crisis. Fareed now, again, you can go to our website, our Facebook page, see all about it. Fareed relentlessly goes around the country sharing his story because he says if somebody else had shared that story with him, he might have thought about that gun that he had in his home and the potential consequences associated with it.
So I think we have time for a couple more questions. Next question.
Hi. I just want to say thank you for the work you're doing. And as you can hear, I'm from England, and your gun thing, I can't. Sorry, guys, I can't get to grips with it. It's
Fair
just
enough.
a different planet. And I've been here a few years, and I see Sandy Hook and Orlando, and it's horrible. It's truly horrible. And I'm wondering, first of all, I had two things. I mean, what happened yesterday with the election? Has that set you back, or who's going to go and take him on? That's the first thing.
We are.
Sorry?
All of us.
I think so. I hope so.
Sorry, you can answer that too.
Maybe some good can come out of it. I don't know. And it's like, where's the voice of outrage? I mean, where is the voice? I mean, the whole thing is so outrageous. When we had Dunblane, as you know,
Yep.
something happened.
Yeah.
We were so shocked that somebody could go in and kill children, that we passed some laws. Now, obviously, there's a lot of political stuff I don't understand about, you know, the right to bear arms, blah, blah, blah. But as I've listened to you talking, it's obviously a huge economic factor. It's an economy.
Yeah.
It's like when they banned smoking here, there, and everywhere. Right. People who sold cigarettes, oh, God, our livelihoods, it's the same thing.
Right.
So I don't know. Way to go, guys.
So the dirty little secret is that it really has nothing to do with the right to bear arms, or the Second Amendment, or people coming to take anybody's guns away. As you've observed, it has to do with an industry trying to sell more of its product without any concern whatsoever of the consequences, which gets to your other question of where's the outrage. The outrage is there, and it's building. It's already at unprecedented levels. We're already seeing great examples of change. Even last night, we saw change. There were ballot initiatives in 4 states across the country where the American public directly gets to vote instead of counting on our legislators to represent us. In 3 of those 4 places, those ballot initiatives passed. That's a demonstration of where including in Nevada, where it's a classic battleground state with a lot of people who are very supportive of the Second Amendment, and we won that. We won a number of tight races where, for the first time, elected leaders and candidates were running on this issue, which itself is unprecedented. So the outrage is there. It's Bill. Remember the white blood cell thing? It's happening, and it warms my heart every time I see, you know, all the activists out there. What does Lady Gaga call them? Little monsters, right? You know, kind of. It's a, you know, kind of converging and attacking.
In this scenario, are you Lady Gaga?
Hey, I like it. You don't want to hear my karaoke, you and I.
And yet I do.
There you go. And yeah, so, you know, last night at the presidential level, to get to your first question, I'm kind of going in reverse order here, was a setback and a disappointment that I think a lot of us on a lot of levels, it's going to take us a long time to get over. But the good news is we had some major victories where candidates ran on this. And we also have a strategy that we've talked about, bad apple gun dealers, beating back the myth about the dangers of guns in the home that have nothing to do, doesn't matter who's president, doesn't even matter who's in Congress. We can save thousands of these lives every year without even worrying about that.
World where people don't have a gun in their house for security, where I'm not saying that'll happen here, but can you picture what it's like? It's like the police don't carry guns mostly. I mean, can you imagine?
So yeah, so the vision is where people act in accordance with the real risks and dangers. And you know, sometimes when I'm speaking, I have the honor of giving a TED Talk in February, and I actually concluded by, you know, I'm a former ad guy, as I talked about, talking about my favorite show, Mad Men, which had recently concluded, and talked about how that's a real source of inspiration, right? Because all of these things, you watch an episode of that show and you see all these things that used to be considered not only socially acceptable, but glamorous and sexy, from smoking in the office, the, you know, misogyny, although given what happened last night, I don't know if that's back in style now. But, you know, all these other things, drinking and driving, that, you know, people completely accepted, that now are considered outrageous and wrong and socially unacceptable. And that's the vision, where the American public finally comes together and says enough, and based on common ground and our common values, which at the end of the day is just keeping all of us safer. You're not a bad person if you bring a gun into your home thinking it makes your family safer. You've just made a bad decision based on bad information put in your head by people who are bad people, who know good and well the consequences that they're causing. So it's about communicating this issue for what it is and basing it on our common ground, which is just keeping all of us safer.
Guys, I have to wrap it up. When are you honoring Jess and Katie Couric? When is this happening again?
November 15th.
Right.
Yeah, at the at Cipriani Broadway.
And if people want to donate or take part and volunteer for the Brady Center, how can they do that?
BradyCampaign.org, and follow the Donate Now or follow the path to make your voice heard, and we make it super easy for you, and we hope everybody out there does that.
And if you feel dismayed by yesterday's election, then you should be doing things like that. You should look for campaigns, you should be looking for organizations that you can donate to, that you can help, that you can volunteer. That's the only way we're going to get through this. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, guys. Thank you.